Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, looking good on the YouTube side. Live. All right. So welcome everyone here. The Native Brace. I have Flores here, and she is going to share her and chat a little bit. So on that note, I will go ahead and turn it over, and feel free to introduce yourself and take it away.
Thank you so much. My name is Xelina Flores. I'm a birth educator and a doula. I've been working as a doula for about 10 years, give or take a few. So a little bit about me, the way that I started in birth work was a lovely friend invited me to go to a workshop. And it was a birthing from within workshop for 3 days, I believe. And it was in Austin. And so I decided to go, not really knowing a whole lot about natural birth, even though as a child, it was around me quite a bit. I had midwives and other birth workers that were around me since I was a kid. But I didn't really pay much attention to it until I had my own 3 children. And so I was telling one of my friends my birth story, and she said, I suggest that you come to this workshop because I think you would find it really interesting because it talks a little bit about what you were feeling. And I felt a little detached from my experience, and I didn't understand really what was going on with me post birth, with each of my births all being in a hospital. And so I went to this workshop, and I was very moved. I had never heard anybody talk about birth the way that the mentors were speaking of birth at this workshop, and then listening to all the other attendees open up and share their stories. I think I cried maybe 5 or 6 times during the whole experience. And I decided that I was going to dive right into doula birth education mentoring certification as soon as possible, because I felt that it was something I hadn't felt moved in that way before. It was kind of a moment of realizing that this is something that I needed to incorporate into my life and learn more about immediately. And I didn't really understand completely what that meant until I went to my first birth. What I really liked about Birthing from Within was that they used a lot of storytelling, and they did talk a lot about Indigenous birth practice. And they pulled from a lot of different cultures, and then they encouraged us as mentors to put our own story into it. And I was able to begin my journey into learning what that story was. So I started to speak to my family about their birth experiences so that I could incorporate some of that into my storytelling and understand my birth experience more. And I learned that there was a little bit of a gap in between my birth experience, my mother's birth experience, my grandmother's birth experience, and my great-grandmother's birth experience. Clearly a transition where birth was moved into a hospital. And when birth was moved into a hospital, that's where a lot of our history seems to be kind of lost, especially in storytelling. That's when I felt that a lot of the storytelling stopped, because I my mother didn't know my grandmother's birth story. She had no idea. She just knew that she came home with a baby. She didn't even know when she was pregnant. And my mother's birth story was also very similar to mine. And I grew up following the Native traditions. So this made me question really deeply what happened here, what was going on. I didn't understand why was it that I had grown up following Native traditions. My parents are spiritual leaders, and we follow the Azteca, Mexica, Chichimeca, Conchero dancing. We're sun dancers, and but yet the birth aspect of it was not there. And like I said, we did have people from Mexico and from other places come and stay with us that were midwives, but I didn't understand why my mother decided to have her birth in a hospital and why I decided to have my babies in the hospital. And the triggers that I had in going to this workshop, learning about natural birth, it was very emotional. I felt a lot of movement inside of me. And so as I started to explore this deeper, I wanted to do my best to reconnect and to create a bridge between my great grandmother's birth experience and to what I could offer my future clients in regards to options. I do feel that birth in a hospital, the tools that they have, I'm grateful for them. And I do believe that all women should decide what's best for themselves and for their family. And having seen so many births in the past 10 years, I've learned to appreciate the balance and the that all of these things being available, the more tools we have, well, the better it is for all of us. And I started to see more and more people getting very interested in Indigenous birth practices. It became started to become commonplace in doula work and birth work. For example, incorporating cacao into birth work, or more use of herbs. The rebozo has become quite popular. Most doulas, have learned about the use of rebozo, and so I was getting hints of this from different places, and so I decided maybe about a year and a half ago that I was going to ask the universe for a teacher to come to me, that I would cross paths with a teacher that followed a complete 100% Indigenous birth practices to teach me some of these things, because I even though I had known people that were using some of these techniques and blending them into their practice as a tool, I really, really wanted to see what these practices look like in their original places, what they look like, and what they sounded like, and what tools were used, and the origins of it, the history. So I went to my altar and I put on a candle and I said, okay, I'm going to ask that a teacher come into my life that can show me these things. And you never know how it's going to happen. And it's always a surprise, because usually after 2 weeks of asking for that, if it doesn't happen, sometimes it goes off into the air and we kind of forget about it. And I think it happens like that for a reason. And so here in Texas, I ended up meeting somebody in a completely different environment that had nothing to do with birth, but it was a person who came to lecture about the concheros, the history of the concheros in Mexico, which is the spiritual practice that my family follows. And when I started to talk to him, he said that that his father was from Guatemala and followed the Mayan traditions, and his mother was from Mexico, and that he had gone to search for his roots, his Mayan roots, and ended up living in Guatemala for many years, studying with a Mayan midwife, and he ended up practicing as a Mayan midwife in the highlands of Guatemala. And I was amazed. And I didn't say anything. I didn't say that I was a doula. But when he came to visit with my family, he noticed that I had a lot of books and things about birth, and asked me about it. And I said, yeah, yes, I work as a doula. And he said, oh, this is fantastic. I really want to make a connection with the U.S. and bring some of this information that I know, because I can't practice as a midwife outside of Guatemala, because I don't have the proper certification, because a lot of Indigenous midwives do not go through a certification process, a traditional one. And he said, I would love to be able to teach this and pass this on. And of course, my whole world opened up, and I was very excited. Very, very happy that I had found a teacher. And his name is Apapianteo, and he is the only male midwife that I have ever known. Is interesting, but he does believe that this information is for women. It just happened to be that his story was a little unusual, and he ended up being marked to take on this role of a midwife in his village. So he started to teach me, beginning with using the Mayan calendar, because the idea is that consciousness is given to the child in gestation. And, that idea was something that I had felt for a long time, but I didn't know how to put it to words. And I really like this idea of giving the power back to women, and understanding that they, a lot of times we think about consciousness, at least in Western psychology, happening later, as the child develops in their environment. And so the idea of consciousness happening in gestation, and that everything that, as when we're carrying our babies, everything that we do influences the essentially the day that the baby is born. And then from there on, the Mayan calendar is able to be used to learn about the formula, the personality, the consciousness of the child, and it gives a great deal of information. And so this helped me to shift my doula model to begin working with women from the moment that they call me. And so when I do get contacted, I used to say, well, I usually start working with my clients at the end, the final trimester. We'll do our classes, and then we will be close to the birth, and that way, we're prepared with all this information that usually kind of just flies away once the labor actually begins. And so I shifted it to where I started working with my clients at the moment that they contact me, and I say, let's start working now. And the first thing that I do is ask them for the day that they were born and their partner the day that they were born, and I work with my teacher to get an idea of parents formula and a little bit about how they are existing in space to help us work with them better. And then after that, I start meeting as often as they'd like. Typically, I'll do classes, and once a week or bi-weekly in the beginning, depending on the schedule and the needs. And it's an effort to build a deeper bond with parents and to support them through the entire process instead of just at the very end. That shift changed a lot of things in helping me understand, go a little bit deeper in understanding what's happening emotionally with couples, with partners, with women early on in pregnancy. And that was something that that I kind of had bits and pieces about, remembered about with my own birth experiences, but now that I see it again and again, I understand, have a little bit of a deeper understanding of how we having support from earlier on, I think has a lot of benefits for both the birth worker who is wanting to support and for the couple. Some of the more practices that I started learning more about that I incorporated also was going deeper into learning more about the rebozo as well. And so I had been using the rebozo since pretty much the beginning of my doula practice. I had taken some workshops. I took a workshop with Gina Kirby and actually bought most of my rebozos from her. And I found it to be a really lovely introduction to the rebozo. And my teacher, my current teacher, told me, well, in the highlands of Guatemala, they do use the rebozo, but they don't use them for births. It's not necessarily designated for births. And so I started to explore that a little bit. And there are a lot of places in Mexico and that do use the rebozo for births. But it was interesting that it was, this rebozo specifically is from Guatemala. It's really beautiful. But for me, it became really important to use the rebozo not just for getting people into optimal positions, but because the rebozo itself, this, the weaving, the patterns that represent the families, the region. People who know about textiles can look at these and know what region it came from and the hands that put all the work to make these. That, even though I could use, like my teacher said, it's like you can use this towel, you can use, it really doesn't matter if it's a rebozo or not. But for me, I felt that there is unique needs in the US. And especially for, we don't have, I feel that if you live somewhere like Guatemala or some parts of Mexico, you get to see this in abundance, these beautiful textiles. You get to see these colors, and you get to see these things that are indigenous, that are very old. And that's not really commonplace around us here. And so for me, I use it as a tool to help transport my clients to a different mindset. So even though I could probably use a towel to do similar techniques or other things, I think that this is a beautiful way or a reminder, and also bringing into the space something that is, that holds that the old indigenous ways that I want to incorporate. And so when I was in that mindset, I started thinking about the needs of women here in the U.S. and what we when we're pregnant, what we need that might be unique from people who have more access to fresh food, less processed foods, no GMO. And, I imagine in the highlands of Guatemala, they have uh, a lot of natural around them, mountains and beautiful forests. And, when we're in a city environment, I feel that there's going to be a call for some things that we might need that are a little bit different. And so I think about that, whenever I'm bringing in some of these indigenous practices into my work, and thinking about some of the things that people are already weaving into their work, that are pulling from indigenous practice, but maybe aren't common, or weren't commonplace for people in tribes, but we have made them a lot more popular. And I know that there has been some debate about that, about if that's right or not, or if that would be considered cultural appropriation, or a way that is pulling attention away uh, from indigenous practice and methods that are used for to make money. And my feeling about that is that although some of the practices that are happening, especially in the US, that are becoming really popular, I do think that the importance of respecting, and to make sure that you have a deep understanding of the history of what it is that you're doing. And if you decide to change it, or if it's changed from its original form, that you also have an honest dialogue about that as well. Because what it comes down to is that these are our tools. These are the things that we use as birth workers, to help our community, to help families to have a birth experience that they're coming out of with a sense of peace. And if you're using practices that are pulled from different traditions in different ways, I think that is okay. And I think that this is something that we should continue to do in our evolution of learning. But one of the things that I would like to see more is the opportunity for Indigenous midwives and birth workers to have a platform to teach us about the old ways. Because one of the things about the old ways is that it can be a constant. It could be something that is a foundation. It can be something. It's something that hasn't changed and shouldn't change when in certain places, so that we can have a bit of an anchor with all the craziness and the chaos that is happening, and all the changes that are always, all these things that come in as, well, this is this is something new, and this is something exciting, and this is, there's this other method, and now we're going to do these different steams, and now we're going to try all these, really new and exciting things. At least with the Indigenous practices, we can have something that is not changing, and we can go to and look at and say, okay, like, we know where that came from, and we know how that works, and we know how it can help. And then we can decide whether that's something we want to incorporate into our practice or not, honoring the teachings of the elders and the teachers, especially if we give them an actual platform where they can come and they can and share their stories, because I'm sure a lot of them would love to. And I do see it more. Um, you know, people being brought from Mexico, or people going to Mexico or going to Guatemala to learn with elders. And I think that that's a really, really wonderful thing. One of the other things that that I started to incorporate into my doula work is the use of the steam. And so one of the things that I've heard a lot of people talk about is the yoni steam. And so I started to explore, I wanted to explore what that was, because I didn't really know. I had heard about steaming, but then I started to, for it to really become commonplace. And so I wanted to know, okay, well, I think that there's probably steaming in my lineage as well. So I started to learn more about the temazcal, which is essentially like a sweat lodge. And so that has, the temazcals have been around, I mean, they 14th century. Um, and so this is something that has been around for a very long time. In the Mayan way, I recently learned that that the steaming happens after the birth, pretty soon after the birth, with the mother and the baby. And the steam has a significant symbol in the Mayan culture, which I found really interesting. That it's almost like what we would call here, like the soul. And so in the Mayan way, that's called the ushlab, and the ushlab is our, it's like our essence. And so that is something that becomes that can weaken after childbirth, because we pass it, part of it, to the baby. And so going into steam can help to strengthen that for the mother. And so those are techniques that I'm in the process of learning now, and planning to build a temazcal on my parents' land. And this makes them very happy, because seeing all this unfold and allowing for these gaps in our traditions to be filled again, with the generations following them, is you know, I think it's a necessary thing that needs to happen. And I encourage everybody to look into their own history, because there's indigenous birth practices all over the world. I mean, I would love to know what happens, you know, what happened in Ireland and New Zealand, and I mean, they're in Africa. And there's a lot of information out there, but I feel like it seems, you know, a lot of it seems very surface. And so you know, I would love to go deeper, because there was so many things that I didn't know as I was exploring this, my own lineage. Just the reasons why things are done, or the reason, or certain days that things are done on, or the intention, or instead of just going through the motions, because we can go through the motions of anything. We can say certain things, we can do certain things, and but if we don't understand the purpose of it, like really understand it, then sometimes we can lose the magic that that turns it into, you know, something that leads to a result. And so, you know, those are some of the things that I would encourage people who were interested in doing that. Another thing that I have decided to do with my birth practice is I struggled a little bit with personally, because I do think that, I mean, everybody has their own story and how they are using this work. Either it's something they do on the side, or it's their main source of income, or it's, you know, everyone has their own story. So this is in no way a judgment on what anybody does, but I have decided that I was going to move my practice into donation based. I wanted my relationships with my clients to not be influenced at all by the money exchange. I didn't want to say, okay, well, if this is all you can afford, that's going to modify what I can provide for you. I didn't want to give packages. I didn't want to do anything like that. I wanted to do everything that I would do for somebody who is paying the full amount. I wanted to offer that to everyone across the board. For somebody who couldn't pay anything at all, and for somebody who wanted to donate more than than I was that I would have even charged. So there's been some really beautiful things that have happened in my relationships with my clients because of that. And it's also opened up my demographic. I had a very specific demographic that I used to work with before. And now I'm able to see a much bigger demographic of clients, which really makes me very happy. I find that very satisfying, and that I can offer my services, my classes, my support, and also introduce them to my teacher for consultations and for support as well, completely donation based. And so that makes me also think about the ways, the old ways, and how we used to interact in a community, in a tribal setting where everybody had something to offer, somebody to contribute, and and then there was the midwives and the communities and the healers that people would go to, and the people who would make the places to live, the people who would hunt the food, um, and I felt that that created the possibility for more trust and closeness in your community. And so I have found that has shifted my doula work a great deal, um, and so I've been really happy with these changes and these and this is 1 year into learning some of these indigenous practices, and so I feel like the learning is never going to end, because there's so much, um, and it's been a really eye-opening experience, and I'm really excited that I'm able to share that with all of you, with my community, with the city, and to be able to give my teacher a chance to share some of his experiences and some of his words, and so that's pretty much all I have, and sharing. If anybody wants to contact me, I'm on social media, Birth Texas, and I think my email will be shared here as well, and so I'm happy to answer any questions or to go deeper about anything that I touched on, or anything else that anybody has to ask. I'm happy to do my best to provide you with that information. Thank you so much.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all that. I don't see any comments in the chat right now, but I will definitely link your information there so people can reach out to you and get more information as well. So yes, thank you so much for sharing your story. It was beautiful, very insightful, and I'm very honored that you took your time out to share with us in our community here. Did you have anything else to say to close it out?
I just wanted to thank everybody who organized this. Sorry if I'm dark now because I'm sitting outside and we saw the sun go down together. So, but I just wanted to thank everybody who organized this and everyone who is watching and everyone who shares this. You know, I think it's such a beautiful thing for our birth workers when they come together and they organize things like this. And so I just wanted to give you my words of gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you all for tuning in. We will share this and it will be up here. So feel free to watch it later and share it later. And we'll share.